Hello, everyone. This is Joelle, and welcome to my YouTube storytelling channel. Happy Labor Day! I hope you all are enjoying your long weekend with your loved ones. Be safe and travel well. Today, I'm back to read Chapter 3 of The Bodyguard and the Courtesan. I hope that you have enjoyed Chapters 1 and 2. I invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy. Father, I have found the man I wish to marry, Samara said as she entered the dining hall. The evening feast was laid on the table with wine being poured. The final candle was lit by the servant, and all left the room as father and daughter sat down to dine. Prime Minister Douglas gathered up his fork and knife in his hands as he smiled at Samara. You have. I was going to speak with you about this. I also found a man for you. Samara's face paled. Father, I demand you listen to me first. It is my life, and I prefer to choose a man who must lay in my own bed. Well, I have a feeling you and I might have chosen the same man. Are you speaking of Lord Waylon? Her face lit up, and she smiled from ear to ear. Father, you are wise. Yes, I speak of him. Isn't he strong and brave, the kind of man you would like for me to have? He is certainly a very well-merited young man. The king trusts him, and so I would like him to have you as his wife. I spoke to the king, and he had mentioned about a few other women in the kingdom, but I insisted that he choose you. Smiling, Samara replied, Father, you're wondrous. Please send out a letter to inform the king to have him here for dinner with us. I shall like to spend more time with him. Consider it done. Waylon entered the palace hall and rounded the corner to the king's private study. King Cassius Yang was standing feeding his parrot with his long hair down and wearing a golden robe. The man was still strong and handsome, even at the age of 60, and he was an enticing tall figure that made many cower down. My king, Waylon said as he bowed, you requested my presence. King Cassius turned and smiled. Ah, Waylon, I have great news for you. I have found a wife for you. Waylon's heart sank, and he forced a laugh. My king, I did not realize you were looking for me. There are many brothers before me who are in need of wives. The king laughed and walked to pat him on the shoulder as he sat down on a chair. You speak nonsense. You are past the prime of marrying and are an old man already. If I am old, it is because I need rest. Laughing, the king replied, You need a good woman. Sit down. He took a seat and looked up at the king. My king, what woman did you find me? Prime Minister's daughter, Samara. She has sent word for you to join them for dinner on the morrow eve. You are very lucky that Douglas likes you. His daughter is a little spoiled, but she is rather easy on the eyes. Once she gets a good man, he can tame her into place. Waylon felt his tongue tied as he thought about the woman he had met at the banquet. She was not of interest to him. She is a very bold woman. That she is. But a man needs a bold woman to lead the world. She is the perfect mate for you. It has been arranged. I shall send word of your betrothal to the Prime Minister and announce it to society. It shall be the wedding of the year. Waylon's face paled and he lowered his gaze. The king noticed and he leaned forward on his knees, staring. Then he laughed and stood up, walking to the parrot and turned back round to face him. You may think that I don't know where you go when you venture out late at night. But I do, Waylon, for I seek the same pleasure you do. Waylon lifted his head up. I know not of what you speak. King Cassius laughed as he crossed his arms. You do not fool me with your long face. I saw your actions at the banquet. You purposely intervened so that snake lion would not be her guest for the night. My king, Waylon said as he stood up. The king raised his hand and smiled. Waylon, she is beautiful, every inch of her. But she is not a proper wife for you. Marry Samara and keep her night pleasures still. No one will ever know, and if Samara is smart, she will allow you to continue to seek Maisie. We are men of pleasure, and we like the same things. It is a good thing that she offers it to the both of us. But if you refuse this marriage, the Prime Minister will have your head on a plate. Willin sighed and lowered his face. Yes, my king. Maisie placed the golden hoop earrings on her lobe and looked at herself in the mirror. She was wearing a green dress with a slit in the front with a low cleavage. Tonight, the king had announced that he would be arriving and keeping her company. If he was her guest, most likely he would be the only one for the evening. She rubbed some oil on her wrist just as the knock came at the door. Walking over, she opened it, and the servant stood there, smiling, offering her a basket of fine fabrics and gold bracelets as the king appeared behind him. He stepped to the side, and she smiled, allowing him in as she set the basket down on the table. My king, you spoil me lavishly. I am afraid I have become the latest gossip among the walls, she said. King Cassius smiled and closed the door as he came to wrap his arms around her curvy waist, pulling her close. If anyone says anything bad, I can have them removed. Smiling, she turned around and met his lips for a brief second. You are the king. Anything you say will be heard and followed. He kissed her cheek lightly, walked to the bed, and sat down. He patted the place beside him, and she walked to him, but instead took his lap. She curled around him like a cat, and he laughed, a throaty echo that made him sound like a young man. My, are we frisky tonight? He whispered as he held her waist. I have some news for you. She pulled away and smiled at him. What news do you bring me? A wedding, he whispered. Waylon's, actually. Maisie kept her smile on her face, for she knew he was purposely announcing it to see her reaction. She wrapped her arms around his neck. Did dear Waylon finally find himself a bride? Or did you appoint him one? I did, of course. You know the law. But I wanted to share this with you first. I know how close the two of you are with one another. She bit down the hurt as she replied, I am close with all my customers. His mouth opened wide as he said, Oh, the truth is revealed at last, and here I thought I was special. May I stay the night? You are the king. You can do anything you please.
Take me on a spree. I wanna get to know me, every little inch of me. Gentle while you stroll.
The candle was burning low as Maisie watched the king sleeping soundly on the bed. Their lovemaking had been quite fierce, and it was probably because of him staking claim on her, since Waylon was getting married. The news had left her stunned, even though she expected it. Waylon had fought to try to keep her safe all these years, and now a woman of royal blood would be at his side for him to love and show the world. She had to admit that part of her was jealous that the woman would get to experience what she wished she could have. But the life she had been born with would never gift her such accommodations. She was lucky she was alive and had a roof over her head. She only knew this life and only knew Delaney as her mother. Maisie knew that shortly before the dawn rose, the king would wake, kiss her goodbye, and lead back to the palace where the queen slept in the cold bed. This was what she knew, and the life she led. She was the pleasure men sought when night fell and left before the sun rose. Turning to glance at the basket of fabrics on her table, she fingered them and smiled. Such fine gifts for a woman like her, and the world hated her presence. As soon as she walked into a room, the woman sneered, and the men looked around to see who reacted. The reaction meant they had spent a night in her bed. She knew this was the reason why she forbid Waylon to fight for her. He would never gain a good public image if he were to have her by his side. Even the king himself pretended to not know her when he threw banquets, although at night it was his seed that spilled onto her bed sheets. She felt the tears prick her eyes, and she shoved the heel of her hands at them, forcing them away. If she could choose, she would choose to be born into a life of solitude on a farm where the wild roses grew and life was easy. And as she thought of that, Kaiden's smiling face came into her mind. Only him would be able to bring her what she needed now. Perhaps it was time she really decided what her future would be. Tonight, the king has invited everyone in the kingdom to attend a special banquet at the palace. May I accompany you there? Kaiden asked as he handed her the dress he'd taken to have mended. Her eyes brightened and she smiled up at him. You took my dress to be fixed, she whispered. No wonder I could not find it. I would love to accompany you, Kaiden. I look forward to having you on my arm. I shall return home to Reddy and pick you up on my horse tonight. Ride with me in our carriage. That would be fine too. The doors to the palace were opened as guests began pouring in. The weather was a bit gloomy, and Kaiden was glad he decided to ride in Maisie's carriage instead of having her come on his horse. It would most likely rain later tonight. He looked at her, beautiful in her white gown, and he felt instantly like a royal man. When they made it to the palace hall, literally all the men turned to gaze at her. I feel like I'm out of place, Kaiden said as he adjusted his tie. I am not used to wearing such fine attire. My days on the farm is just me without a shirt. Laughing, Maisie said, You look dashing tonight. Do not go chasing other girls now, you hear? You are the only girl I see. The two of them walked past the buffet table, and he reached for a drink from a servant. He handed it to Maisie and grabbed another for himself. A drum roll had everyone's attention, and they turned as the king and queen descended from the stairs. He was handsome, wearing a gold robe, and her in an astounding green gown. My people, I have gathered you here for a very special night, and I could not think of having anyone besides my very own people who I love and cherish to join me. Tonight, we celebrate the announcement of an engagement for my royal bodyguard Waylon and the Prime Minister's daughter, Samara. At the mention of the names, the two appeared at the top of the stairs and descended. Kaiden felt her hand tighten around his arm, but he pretended not to notice. The crowd applauded, and he saw Waylon's eyes fall into hers, and a dark emotion ran over him. Samara was beaming with a bright smile. Did you know it was an announcement? Maisie asked. Not of this sort, Kaiden said honestly. Are you all right? Maisie turned to him and smiled, although she looked pale. I am quite well, Kaiden. Come, the music has come on. Let us dance. He walked with her to the dance floor and took her hand in his, guiding her to move as the music surrounded them. Maisie, come away with me. I have a place on my farm for you. I can buy your freedom. Life with me will not be as grand as when you receive gifts from the men who seek you, but you will not have to work and please others any more, Kaiden whispered. She looked up at him, and a smile appeared on her face. I have thought over it many times, Kaiden. My place in this world is much needed to be discussed. I am not always going to be young, and time will be against me. I do not wish to perform this for the rest of my life. He pulled her closer to him and tilted her chin up. Then marry me, be mine, and I shall give you peace and comfort. Peace and comfort, she repeated in a low whisper. That sounds heavenly. Kaiden bent down and kissed her deeply and felt her hands around his neck. When she responded with his kiss, his heart fluttered, and he pulled back to look at her. Tonight, I shall speak with Delaney and give her the terms of my condition. She will not refuse me. Maisie smiled and touched his cheek. All right. Take me away, Kaiden.
아주 우연히 듣게 된 그 노래 나도 모르게 숨죽여.
Samara held Waylon's arm as the two nodded to the people giving them kind wishes. She felt him tense when he saw someone in the crowd, and she could not figure out who. But when they neared the dance floor, he tensed again, and she followed his gaze to the young woman dancing with the long-haired gentleman. She did not recognize the woman, but she saw that many of the men noticed her and were eyeing her like candy. What are you looking at? She asked. Waylon turned to her. No one. Her heart sank. I asked what, not who. He laughed and patted her hand. Nothing, my lady. Samara smiled and she turned his head toward her. Let me be clear about one thing, my lord. I am not a woman who likes to share her husband. If you are to be married to me, you will have only me, and that goes for your eyes as well. If I ever catch them wandering elsewhere but my face, I shall be the first to gouge them out. Is that clear? Waylon let out a heavy breath. First, I am not your husband, yet. Second, I am a man and my eyes will wander. If you cannot handle it, then perhaps you should have chosen another man to engage yourself to. Third, and I say this kindly, Samara, you are not the woman I would have picked. Forgive me. I need a drink. She dropped her hand and walked to the table to gather a cup for him. As she watched the people around her, she gave them a forced smile and turned back around to find the woman dancing. The song ended and the woman excused herself, and Samara found the perfect reason to chase after her. It took a few strides, but she caught up to her and came to block her path. Up close and personal, she was more than just a beautiful woman. She reeked of seduction and exotic from the top of her head to her feet. May I help you? She asked. Samara smiled and crossed her arms. You are only here because the king invited everyone in the kingdom to attend. If it were me, you would never receive an invitation. Being this close to you, I can tell you're a commoner with poor eloquence of a lady. The woman's cheek blushed lightly, and she straightened herself. I was here to offer you good wishes for a happy marriage, but I can see that you obviously have made up your mind about who I am. I suppose I should keep my well wishes to myself. Keep your hands off of my husband while you are at it. She smiled. Is that what this conversation is all about? I cannot control it if he were to come seeking me because he cannot get what he wants at home. If you do not like him near me, you better learn how to pleasure your man. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Chapter 4 will be up shortly.
Take me on a spree. I wanna get to know me, every little inch of me. Gentle while you stroke, when you depicture me.